My name is David Tatum. I'm the Chief Program Officer at BRC. For those of you who know us, that stands for the Bowery Residence Committee. Or as we like to say at BRC, our tagline, it stands for Hope, Health, Home, which is what most of you are about every day of every year. And I'm delighted to be the introducer of this particular workshop. My little ribbon says moderator, but in the program, I'm the introducer. And basically what that means is I'm going to acquaint you with two folks who are outstanding individuals at the forefront of their field who have worked together significantly, I've just learned, doing many, many important things on a variety of levels regarding the issue of conflict resolution. So in just a few minutes, I'm going to finish and I'm going to get out of their way because they know what they're doing and they know how to do it. I'm pleased that the room is virtually full. We've got a few open seats, but not many. I can't think of a more important session here during the CUNY conference. I get it. There's 1,500 people here, and there's a whole lot of wonderful things to learn about, get acquainted with, reconnect in terms of the offerings. But how important is it to always focus on improving our skills and having the folks we work with, the teams that we help support, learn more and more, apply more and more in the area of conflict resolution for the people we serve. So I think probably everybody here runs supported housing programs, right? Yeah, good, most, right? At BRC, we spent probably now our third wave of focusing on conflict resolution, peer mediation, a variety of things in our supported housing programs to help improve the quality of life on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis. And we've seen a positive change. We very recently had one of these fine folks come into our programs, into our supported housing programs, and provide some very focused training for our staff. It was very successful, particularly, and I didn't tell you this, particularly with line staff, the milieu staff, those folks who are there 24 hours a day that don't necessarily have that clinical background. The tools, the concepts that you got to reacquaint with, for those of you who know it, learn for those of you who may not today, have a high level of applicability for everybody that comes in contact with the folks we serve. Sound good? Yay, nobody's leaving for the door. Good. I sold it reasonably well, right, folks? All right. So, Maria Volpe, Dr. Volpe, some of you know either because you've been in a room with her, you've attended a workshop, you may know her directly professionally. She is very well known in this arena. She's the director of professor of sociology and director of the dispute resolution program at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's also the director of the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center. As I said, she's extraordinarily well known on an international level. She's written extensively, researched this topic to a very high degree, and provided trainings and workshops on dispute resolution processes, particularly mediation, and is, as I said, recognized as a leader in this field. Her work in training and working with organizations focuses in the area of educational settings, but not exclusively. She conducts dispute resolution skills trainings and facilitates a wide range of groups and administers also grant-funded projects, including the dispute resolution in the mental health initiative. So for those of you who've worked through the federal grant-making process, you know that the skills in conflict resolution come in very handy, right? So we're going to have Dr. Volpe come up and talk to us in just a minute. Dan Berstein, as I mentioned, we've had a BRC before. We're very high on his work. He's the founder of Mediate, a company that brings conflict resolution skills and services to mental health stakeholders. And stakeholders, as we all know, means a variety of people in a variety of situations, but folks that are truly about receiving services and those that provide services as well. Dan has led in-person and online conflict resolution trainings for staff and tenants in supported housing. has developed a toolkit that we've looked at more at BRC, and helped peer specialists and others apply conflict resolution skills to mental health conflicts in a variety of settings, supported housing specifically. Dan is the vice chair of the diversity committee of the American Bar Association section on dispute resolution, which I'm not directly familiar with your work, but that sounds really cool. He's also a former member of the Mediator Advisory Board, member of the New York Peace Initiative, where he mediated a wide variety of cases. Dan is very public with his bipolar disorder as a part of the Stability Network's efforts to change the conversation about workplace mental health stigma. So of that, I think we're all truly grateful, and particularly those of us who work in this field that face a variety of issues. So please join me in welcoming both these folks. And as I recall, Dr. Volpe, you're up first. Yes. A little technical change for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Dan and I did a session last year, and we're really impressed at how huge this conference is. We're going to spend our time here talking about conflict and ways to deal with it. I can't think of a more important area of study. You know, we focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's in our schools. I also think that we should be focusing on resolution. The soft skills that go with conflict resolution are so critical. Every day when we read those headlines of little simple situations that can lead to assaults and arrests, but even worse, homicides that are preventable if only individuals knew how to make talk work. So we're going to spend our time here talking about some of the kinds of skills that we think are important, but this is just barely scratching the surface. Almost takes a lifetime to learn all the skills and to use them proficiently. So to get started, our agenda is to focus on conflict resolution, how conflict resolution can help, some skill-building exercises, and some resources. And Dan and I are going to share the event doing this. I want to start with talking about conflict. When you hear the term conflict, what images come to mind?
People arguing.
I'm sorry?
People arguing.
People arguing with each other, yes. A few more? Screaming. What else?
Door slamming.
Door slamming, right?
Physically fighting.
Physically fighting.
Crying.
Crying.
Threatening.
Threatening.
No communication.
No communication, good. People just avoid each other. One more. Stress, tension, misunderstanding. When we think of all these terms, is the image a positive or negative one? It's pretty negative when we think about conflict. In fact, though, if we learn how to deal with it constructively, we might figure out ways to come up with very creative solutions to even those very difficult situations. So, I also wanted to focus on for just a few minutes, what are some of the sources of conflict? What do people fight over, argue over, have disagreements over?
Noise. Understanding.
Noise,
Lack of
lack of understanding, money, power, space, you're too disrespect. So if we were to come up with a definition of conflict, people have conflict over virtually anything and everything. Anything and everything. And what's interesting is that some of the conflicts that we experience are over situations that people will say, well, I didn't intend for that to be the way it was. But the reality is it's not the intent, it's the impact. It's how it lands with the person. And increasingly we're hearing about the importance of studying, for example, microaggressions. How many of you have heard that term? Good. Growing number of us are becoming very familiar with those small verbalizations and behaviors that can be intentional or unintentional, and often are unintentional, that are perceived to be insulting, offensive, demeaning. So, for example, if you were to say to someone, where were you born? The person who's asking the question could be asking a perfectly harmless question, right? Where were you born? And the person says, New York City. And someone will say, no, where were you really born? And they'll say, New York City. And they'll say, what country were you born in? The United States. You've probably heard individuals who are from certain groups who get those kinds of questions all the time. The assumption is, when you're asking someone, where are you from, is that perhaps they're forever going to be a foreigner in our land. The person who has spent the most amount of time academically developing the field of microaggressions at Columbia is Asian American, and he was born in Portland, Oregon, and he often gets asked, well, where are you from? And he'll say, Portland. No, where are you really from? And he'll say, Portland, Oregon. Now, what country were you born in? And he'll say, the United States. He says he feels like he's being treated as if he's forever a foreigner, someone who was born right here. But those kinds of situations are increasingly making us sensitive about the kinds of interactions that we have with others. And there are a wide range of interactions in the microaggression field that we should be really sensitive about. And know your audience, know how you're speaking with them so that you don't create the kinds of conflicts that might otherwise ensue. So conflict is universal, it's inevitable, and it's also contextual. It's socially constructed. What might be a conflict for certain individuals is not necessarily a conflict for others, and we know that. You could have a conversation with someone around where were they born, and it would be a really interesting conversation. Have that conversation with someone else, and they could be really offended, and the next thing you know, you're engaged in a pretty defensive kind of conversation with them. So, what I want to spend the next few minutes on is conflict resolution itself. It's an umbrella term. It covers the full range of ways of dealing with conflict, from avoidance to annihilation, from A to A, right? So you could either walk away or, at the other extreme, end up killing someone. Neither one of those options, honestly, is a good one. And we think, well, walking away is better. Well, what happens when you keep avoiding a situation? Anger, resentment. It can get worse. It keeps building. The emotions keep building. The situation keeps festering. And then all you need is a trigger, right? And there it goes. You know, you sometimes hear individuals saying, gee, so-and-so and so-and-so are getting divorced. I never saw them fight. I never saw any anger. And then, one day something happened and they're getting a divorce and everyone's surprised. Well, they've been avoiding each other for maybe decades. And finally one says, this is it. I'm going to get out of this relationship. We also talk about flight and fight, the two other extremes, that people will flee from situations or fight. Neither one of those is a good option. We like to think about fix in the conflict resolution field. Between avoidance and annihilation are all these other processes that we have on the screen here in addition to others. Negotiation, and we're only going to focus on 4, and I'm going to go through them very briefly with you. Negotiation is a process that involves communication between the parties themselves. Those who are having differences with each other are engaged in this exchange with each other. And the hope is that they reach an agreement on their own. That is the basic conflict resolution process. It's the one that we should probably teach everyone. You and I and everyone negotiate every day. There are those who think that we can negotiate anything. Well, perhaps. But we could all do it much better. Negotiation is, and there are many techniques that we use on how to get the other side to understand our perspective and how we can better understand their perspective. It's only when the negotiations break down, when these communications break down, that we look to others. One of the processes that we're very familiar with in our culture is going to someone to make a decision for us. Technically, we refer to it as arbitration, but whenever you're a parent and your children come to you and say, I want to watch whatever TV show, and someone says, no, I want to watch whatever, and you say to them, you're going to go to bed and you're going to go and study, you're acting like an arbitrator. What's happened is that the children themselves have not been able to resolve what TV show to watch, and they've asked you to make a decision. Arbitration is usually a term used for a more specific context. Often in the labor field, we look for arbitrators to make decisions. When people are grieving their workplace conditions, they file arbitrations, and someone will make a decision. But the concept is the same. Whenever the negotiating parties can't resolve their own differences and they look to a third party to make a decision, that third party is acting like an arbitrator. They listen to the parties and then they make a decision. And that's a win-lose kind of situation. So every time you turn your situation over to someone, you're subjecting yourself to an uncertain situation that you might win, but you might also lose. If you call a police officer, you're asking a police officer to act as an arbitrator. A teacher in a classroom is often behaving like an arbitrator. In the conflict resolution field, we like to move away from those kinds of processes because the parties themselves lose control. In the housing situation, whenever you make a decision for anyone, those individuals are basically losing control. And whenever you subject your situation to someone because you couldn't resolve it, you're losing control. It's very similar to adjudication and litigation. There's a third party making a decision. We're very familiar with that in our culture. When someone doesn't like something, they'll say, I'm going to sue you. We're looking for a judge or a jury to listen to both sides and then to render a decision, very much like the arbitrator. Uncertainty results, right? You never know how they're going to decide. And the difference between the arbitration and the adjudication is that arbitration is a less formal way of doing it. It's sort of like the parent who listens and makes a decision. An arbitrator in the legal in the labor context will listen to a supervisor and an employee and then make a decision. When it goes to court, to adjudication, there are very specific rules of evidence and procedure. You have to follow order. You have to listen to the judge. You have to file motions, interrogatories. It's not conducted informally the way it might in an arbitration. Well, the conflict resolution field is trying to get everyone to think how they can collaborate with each other. Ideally, we would have everyone becoming really great negotiators, but if we can't get there, then the other process is mediation. And this is a process where the third party gets in the middle. That third party, called the mediator, assists the disputing parties to do what they couldn't do on their own. That mediator is basically an extension of that negotiation process. A mediator does not make a decision. I'll repeat that again. A mediator does not make a decision. It's not surprising in our society, even though mediation is as old as humankind, that we still can't distinguish it from processes like meditation or medication. Perhaps mediators, and more and more of them are learning how to meditate, how to center oneself before one deals with disputing parties. And perhaps a little medication at times might also help, right? When you're dealing with frustrating situations. But a mediator is one that is in the middle between those individuals. And there are all kinds of techniques that mediators use. They do not give advice. They do not make decisions like judges and arbitrators. They basically help the parties to have a difficult conversation, one that they weren't able to have on their own. So let's see. This is no longer switching screens here. Okay, that's fine. So when is mediation appropriate? Well, mediation is appropriate when there's an ongoing relationship between the individuals, which means it's an absolutely perfect process for housing, for families, for even school settings, wherever individuals need to continue to connect with each other. It's really helpful to have a process that helps you to bridge your divides rather than going to someone who'll make a decision where one person wins, the other one loses. And have you ever seen a loser who's happy? Have you ever seen a loser who doesn't want to get back at the other side? Mediation can actually help individuals to understand each other's perspective. They don't have to like each other, but perhaps the mediator can help them to structure their future. My own work is in higher ed, and I deal with very intractable conflict situations. Sometimes it comes down to helping the parties to talk about how they're going to say good morning to each other, because they haven't said good morning for so long they've forgotten how to say, how to greet each other, or how to open or close a file cabinet, because one says it's too noisy and the other one says that they were closing it very quietly. What the mediator does is help to deconstruct what it is that's building up to the point where they can no longer function in that environment. And for you, on a daily basis, I'm sure that you're experiencing situations with tenants, with coworkers, with superiors, supervisors, suppliers, and others who provide you with all kinds of situations. Mediation is that kind of process that will help you if you can't do it directly with the other side. Mediation is also appropriate because there's an impartial, neutral person who helps the individuals to think through what it is that's of concern to them. The mediator does not take sides, as I said. The mediator doesn't show favoritism. The mediator does not look for specific outcomes. The mediator is trying to get the parties to be very creative in their solutions. And the process is confidential. So mediation's appropriate when the individuals don't want to have the whole world know about their conflicts. The parties are empowered. The parties can determine whatever it is that they're interested in. They have a structure that helps them to figure out the next steps in interacting with the other side. It helps them to test the kinds of situations that have become perhaps unrealistic, right? There are times when we think that certain options are the only options. Well, in fact, we're finding that if you talk to the other side, those aren't really realistic options. And another real benefit of mediation is that it helps parties to think about the future. It is not a past-focused process. What will the future be like with the other side? And I think we keep losing the... I think you're on next as well, but we've lost the screen. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who is going to continue our conversation here. I should also note, when is mediation not appropriate? It's not appropriate when there's domestic violence in particular or child abuse kinds of situations. The parties have to be ready, willing, and able. We do not negotiate or help parties to resolve situations around violence in particular, although there are some test projects going on, but most mediators do not mediate between those who are experiencing domestic violence. Okay, Dan.
Of course. So thank you very much, Maria. And so can everyone hear me in the microphone? Yes? No? Hello? Did it go down? Can you all hear me now? Yes. All right, through the microphone? Yes. Okay. So thank you, Maria, for talking a bit about what conflict resolution is and giving us that introduction to conflict and different types of conflict resolution and different processes. So my next step here in this agenda today is to talk about how conflict resolution can help in supportive housing specifically. My background, and I've worked with Maria for over 6 years, is in coming up with ways to take conflict resolution practices and processes and bring them to the world of mental health, bring them to the world of supportive housing, and get some of the tools that mediators like Maria and I use every day in our work and find ways to share them with everybody, whether it be in supportive housing or in other contexts. So the rest of this workshop is focused on giving you those tools. And first, I'm going to share some ideas about how conflict resolution processes and practices might help in supportive housing and some of the work that I've done working with a variety of different supportive housing sites. And then we'll have some skill building exercises, and there are some resources that are going to go with this presentation. So I'm going to put the web address right now on the screen and also my email address. Any of you can email me at any time with any questions. So that's your first resource. I'm standing right here, resource number 1. And then there's a website that you can go to get resources. I'm also going to pass a pad around right now that you guys can just pass around for the rest of the session. If you want to give your email address, I will email you this information and some of the other resources that we have for you. There's actually a one-page handout we made to go with this presentation, but we didn't get it printed in time, so I'll send that as well as a PDF that'll have some summary notes of ways that conflict resolution can help in supportive housing and ways to access some of the resources we've developed. And we've done a number of different projects, including some toolkits that are available online that include webinar instructions and resource tools that you might find useful in your own work. So hopefully you'll either email me, or you'll get the link, or you'll give us your email address, or all three, and we'll be able to get you some of those resources. And I hope I get my pad back, so, because there's a lot of extra paper on there, not just for your email, and I don't like losing those. So I want to start by showing you a map of what I call, through my company MH Mediate, the three different phases where you might consider using conflict resolution in your world of supportive housing. And it's pretty simple. It's pre-conflict, conflict, and escalation. So does anyone have any ideas of what might be a pre-conflict situation in a housing site? Any thoughts? This is before a conflict has arisen, but there's a way we might be able to still become conflict resolvers. So there's no specific situation. We're not going to have a meeting about a problem, but is there anything that might happen before a conflict happens that you guys still might notice as a pre-conflict situation?
Previous conflicts.
What was it?
Previous conflicts between.
Previous conflict. So pre-conflict, great. So sometimes I kept it simple, but you could imagine these arrows keep feeding into each other in a circle, and after one conflict ends, the history of a past conflict could make you realize maybe another conflict's going to happen. And that could be maybe we have a history of two specific tenants, or a tenant and a staff member, or two staff members who have a history of tension and a history of conflict, and we don't think there's a situation now, but maybe we think that that's going to happen again. And it can also be just a specific site or a specific community where maybe it's not, we don't think the same people will continue to have the conflicts, but we know that we've noticed in this environment conflicts keep springing up. So you're not necessarily going to be able to guess who's going to be the person involved, but you can predict that some conflict is going to happen again. Any other ideas of pre-conflict? Yes.
Well, somebody moves in who looks pretty messy.
So somebody moves in who looks messy. So we see a visible sign of a possible challenging behavior, that there's a mess, and we wonder, when is this going to become a situation? So a potential problem blooming, let's say, or looming. So any other ideas? Yes? What noise? A noise complaint. So I would say once you have a noise complaint, you have a conflict on your hand. Once someone's complaining about the noise, there's a conflict. But when there's some kind of precursor where maybe no one's complaining yet, but you can wonder if the noise is going to happen, maybe that's a pre-conflict situation. You in the yellow tie?
Mine was related. I was going to say if a tenant's children are horse playing in the hallway.
So a tenant's children horse playing in the hallway. So a lot of these are signs, maybe there's specific history of conflict, or there's specific warning signs of conflict-prone issues. So usually the kinds of conflicts that I hear about that happen a lot in housing settings, and we're going to give you a chance to do a reflective listening exercise, so I probably shouldn't bias it, but noise is a very common one. Yes, sir? Cultural differences. So noticing that there's cultural differences, that might be another pre-conflict situation where we wonder, will there be a need to address this? Here's an example of pre-conflict situation similar to that, but I consider it cultural. Mental illness. Knowing that people might be walking around with disclosed or undisclosed mental health diagnoses, and sometimes even amongst staff members. Are staff members going to be sensitive to that difference? And is that going to lead to some tension that could eventually become a conflict? So it sounds like we have a good understanding of what a pre-conflict situation is. I'm going to take one or two examples because we're going to actually do a listening exercise where you talk about conflicts you experienced in your different situations. So we'll do one or two examples right now of a conflict. So any specific conflicts that you all want to share about of what we think has gone from pre-conflict to conflict. And we already got one, was the noise complaint. So any other examples?
Dirty bathroom.
Dirty bathroom. So someone's complaining about the dirty bathroom. So this is, you've got the messy information over here. Those are the situations we got over in that area of the room. Any other conflicts that you've experienced? What's a time a situation has boiled over and become something to manage? Yes.
If it's like shared room, when someone's behind on their rent.
A shared room and one of the roommates is behind on their rent. Okay. And then the other roommate is complaining that How does that come to you?
Well, in our agency, we serve veterans that are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and the veteran will come to us because they might be in housing court because one hasn't paid their portion of the rent and they're just like completely behind, and then there's the conflict. That's when they start bickering, and there's like.
So one person's now pulled the other person into housing court because together they're delinquent, but the individual's paying their rent and the other person's not. And then they come to you for help. Yes?
Mixed population building. So I'm an assistant director in one of the buildings in the Bronx, and we have New York tenants, and we also have low-income tenants. So some of our low-income tenants don't understand that, some of our New York tenants deal with mental health issues. So, and they're all some of them live, they live on the same floors, and it's kind of hard because our tenants that are New York, when they're going through their problems, our low-income tenants are like, okay, so how does this person get away with this? You guys aren't reprimanding them the way you guys, speak to us or tell us. So it's hard for them to understand that.
Okay, so that's an interesting situation. We've got low-income tenants and the New York tenants who have different standards they're living by because of their mental health issues. Right. And the low-income tenants are asking, why don't we get the same level of deference or the same? Why is it harder for us? Why do we have to be held to a higher standard than our neighbors who have the New York status? So great. So those are we'll have more time to discuss this. What we're going to do is we're going to have a listening exercise where you'll pair off and talk about some of these, and Maria will lead that after I'm done with this segment. And then at the end, if there's time, we'll be doing Q&A as well. So if you want to talk about specific conflicts, we'll try to talk about some of those at the end. And you can also always, if we don't get time to something, all of you, I really want to invite you, email me. My email address is on the bottom of almost every slide. It's on the emails I passed around. The first one is mine, so that way you can see it there. And don't be shy. We love to field questions for specific situations, and I want to give you guys that time. So let me show. And then the last one is escalation. So what's an example of an escalation situation? There's one thing I'm really looking for here. What's the most escalated thing that can happen at your housing site? Fight? All right. No one said it, but I know you've all had exposure. There's three numbers. 911. 911 is an example of where escalation is hit. When someone's going to 911, that's not all the escalation situations, but usually when people from housing sites are talking to me about escalation, they're saying, is there a way we can prevent the amount of 911 calls we're making? Is there something we can do to intervene? We understand that we can't prevent all of them, especially if there's a medical emergency or concerns about someone's mental well-being, but is there something we could do to reduce that escalation that gets to the 911 call? So that's an example, and that's not everything. So let me give you a quick overview of some ways that in the world of supportive housing, you can take conflict resolution best practices and principles and apply them to these different settings. And on the map, I'm going to show you. So before the conflict, we've got crafting norms. So what does that mean? That means there's no conflict situation for anyone to manage, but we might still start talking to each other in certain ways. Like Maria was saying, how do we say good morning to one another, for instance? What might be crafting norms? Well, maybe we're setting expectations about how we handle messes, so that way none of the messes ever get messy enough to become a conflict. That's a norm. Anything we can do to change how we behave on a regular basis. Now, this is the kind of thing where no one's going to really get a medal for this. No one's going to really get noticed for not having a problem. You're not going to see as many commendations for people who are talking nicely to each other as you are going to see complaints for people who aren't. So it's the kind of thing that's a little bit harder for people to do, but to me, it's the main bread and butter of everything that I like to do. I'm really big on the pre-conflict stuff. Can we all be learning, everyone in this room, skills so when we talk, we are de-escalating right away and we never even get to some of these later stages. That's the idea of crafting norms. Now, conflict resolution, you all heard some of the processes. The two that often get talked about amongst staff members in supportive housing are mediation and arbitration. Raise your hand if you think you're an arbitrator when people have conflicts. So like the parent with the two children fighting over TV. Raise your hand if you think you're an arbitrator. And that's your role. Raise your hand if you think you're a mediator. Okay, a lot of people think they're a mediator. Keep your hand up. No, keep your hands up, mediators. Now, keep your hand up if you never have made a decision or given advice of what to do and you've just let the people resolve it themselves. Okay, so a lot of the people who think they're mediators are actually behaving more like arbitrators. Oftentimes, in the world of housing, there's nothing wrong with it. You can't really be a neutral mediator because you know the people involved and you have a responsibility to your agency, and you might even, at the end of the day, have some power. You might even, at the end of the day, have some power to tell them what to do. Not always, but sometimes you do. So a lot of times, when you're conflict resolvers, you might be acting as arbitrators or you might be acting as mediators. But one thing you can do either way is learn to improve those skills of how to communicate and work with people to be better in those conflict resolution situations. One of the main things to do is try to find ways to show people you're being fair, because a lot of times people will think you're siding with one person or another. So one of the key skills of the conflict resolver is demonstrating that you are being as fair as you can be. But there's a lot of other skills in conflict resolution, and we're going to go over a few of them. We don't have time for all of them, but we're going to give you those resources if you want more afterwards, and I'm always available again for questions. And then the last thing, for escalation, what do we do when we're looking at escalation? Well, we need to be ready to handle challenging behaviors. And we need to have a plan of what we're going to do when we're not going to sit down in those meetings and talk through the conflict, because it's time to do something more significant, like call 911, or just some kind of disciplinary action, because it's escalated to a point where we can't just sit and overlook and treat it like it's a normal discussion about a conflict. Now, the most important thing about escalation, from my point of view as a mediator, is that if two different people do the same kind of behavior, they both receive the same outcome. So if you have a tenant that you really don't like, and everybody has a tenant they really don't like, and you have a tenant that you really like, and everybody has a tenant they really like, you want to make sure that regardless of if it's the tenant you don't like or the tenant that you like, both of them are going to get written up the same way. So that, because otherwise, that goes back to pre-conflict. Otherwise, you're setting up bad norms where people are going to start saying, I don't trust the people managing this conflict because you're playing favorites in some way, or I just feel it. And they might not be able to prove it, but at the end of the day, it's up to each of us to ask ourselves, do we know we're being totally fair, or can we do better? And so that's where conflict resolution tools can help if we're going to manage escalation, especially in being fair, amongst other things. So that's all the different ways it can help. Now let me walk through it a little bit more. So before the conflict, when we're going to do that crafting norms, we might develop listening skills. We might learn how to be validating. So when someone has a problem and they're talking about what's upsetting them, instead of saying you're wrong, we learn to let them feel like their voice is being heard. We might learn to empower choices. So frame everything as if it's a decision that the other people are making, as opposed to telling people what to do. We might be demonstrating fairness, and we might be developing accessible practices that work for people with different needs, so nobody feels excluded. So that's some examples of norms we can develop. And how might we adjust our day-to-day practices? Well, we might have scripts. So we might have talking points of how we're going to talk about a specific situation using some language. So the best example I have is I was once giving a workshop at a housing site, and I was teaching this one idea of saying, instead of saying that's against the rules, say the reason we can't do that for you is because then we'd be playing favorites and we treat everybody the same here. So imagine if that's what you say every time and everybody gets it in their head, that we can't do that different thing, not because it's against the rules, but because here at this housing site, we treat everyone the same. We don't give any special treatment to anyone. So that's an example of a script that could be useful to embody a conflict resolution value of fairness. And if you start using talking points like that, you can adjust your culture. So pre-conflict, the kinds of interventions that you might have at your housing site is some training in this area, and then some scripts and talking points, some handouts you might give out to people that emphasize your core values. Some people have values they hang up on the wall behind them when they start group meetings, if they have groups, and or values at the front of the building. So those are the kinds of resources that you can have, and then maybe some training resources as well. So that's pre-conflict. Now in conflict, what can we do to improve situations in conflict? Well, first, and I have on the slide, we've got arbitration. So we're going to call it an arbitration, because most likely what you're doing when you're meeting with these people is some form of arbitration. Or in the conflict resolution world, we talk about mediation arbitration, where maybe you try to mediate, but if it doesn't work out, the person who's the mediator becomes an arbitrator. So how can we improve that? Well, maybe we can formalize that process and make it follow a process similar to what Maria or I would use as professional mediators. Maybe we would train our staff in general skills, and then also maybe you would make referrals. So maybe you would refer to one of the dispute resolution centers that they have in every county in New York State from the court system with free and low-cost mediation. And if you want to do that, if you want to make the referrals, again, I cite my email address. Please email me. Let me help you make those referrals, because not everybody is equipped to be accessible to working with parties with mental health histories, which there are a lot of in housing. And Maria and I have partnered on developing some great resources designed to help conflict resolvers get up to speed so they're able to be sensitive when they work with those parties. So I'd love to help make that introduction and possibly share those resources if it's possible. And then lastly, for escalation, it's all about what do you do for those challenging behaviors. So can we develop impartial practices? Can we create advanced plans? A lot of times, we talked about ways to be fair and treat people the same. The other thing that's important when it comes to challenging behaviors is to be ready, is to know what you're going to do. So if something happens, people aren't standing around wondering to themselves, what should I do? Should I do something? Should I not do something? But they're ready to go. So planning in advance can help with that. So this is a quick slide, but I'm not going to dwell on it, of what MH Mediate does. But we have tools to train staff, train tenants. We have online trainings and process consulting. And that's an example of some of the stuff that we have. The picture on there is a screenshot from one of the online trainings, and you're going to see some of that when we do one of the exercises now. Also, here's the resources, again, if you want to write them down. Originally, we were going to have them on the handout. And is the pad going around? Does somebody have it? Raise your hand if you have the pad with the email addresses. Okay, I got scared for a moment when no hand went up that someone took my pad, but he's got it. So it's making its way around. And we'll get you this web address, and you'll get an email from my email address. But I'm just flashing this a few times in case you want to copy it down. The web address for the resources, and we'll show it again at the end, is mhmediate.com/Shinny resources. So now we're going to go into the exercises, and Maria will do the first exercise.
Thanks, Dan. I wanted to add, there's one additional resource that some of you might want to avail yourselves of. I run a listserv for conflict resolvers in New York City, if anyone's interested, and all kinds of resources that are made available almost on a daily basis through the listserv. In events, trainings, conferences, jobs, etc. Give me your email address and I'll put you on the listserv. We also run a monthly breakfast that's free at John Jay College for conflict resolvers, and you're all welcome to come. It's on the first Thursday of every month at 8 in the morning. The only ones that depart from the first Thursday are usually the 4th of July week. So our breakfast will be July 12th and not July 5th this year. And New Year's, if that happens to fall on the first Thursday. But for those of you who are interested, give me your name and email, and I'll be happy to put you on.
What I can do is I can give people that opt-in choice when I email from the list that's going around. So I can, so they don't
or
have to,
maybe you can just put listserv after your name.
yeah,
so that
but some people have already gotten the pad.
Right.
So we won't automatically add you, but everyone who gets an email from me with resources, we'll include a link for you to get up onto that listserv.
Thank you. So, reflective listening. All of us get ready to listen in a different way. How do we clear our minds so that we're ready to listen to someone who's ready to talk to us? Well, this is a little departure from this, but if I were to ask you, what's the opposite of talking, what might you say? Listening. But one of my other colleagues, who was the head of the hostage team at NYPD, used to say the opposite of talking is waiting. Think about that. You're waiting. That's when someone is talking, you're there waiting and patiently doing it. So reflective listening requires more than just being there. It almost requires a state of mind, how to be patient. You want to interject. You want to give advice. You want to let them know what you think. But people take a long time sometimes to tell us their stories. It's great to want to listen to stories to be a reflective listener, right? People have to tell you what they're thinking. There are a few other things that you have to pay attention to. Your own tone when you're interacting with individuals, your body language, whether you're too close or too far, eye contact. We know that in some cultures, eye contact is not quite as direct as it is in our culture, so pay attention to that. But think mostly about how you're centering yourself to have these conversations with others. What we're going to do is spend a few minutes trying how to be a reflective listener. So start thinking about clearing your mind that you're going to be there for the person who's talking, that you're not going to let everything else interfere with what they're saying. And then we're going to ask you, let's see, how about if I ask you right now to pick a partner, probably the person next to you. All of you identify who you're going to be talking to. Everyone have a partner? Okay. Designate one person A. Who's going to be A in your group? A, raise your hands. A. Okay. Who's B? Okay. All right. So A, you will decide what you're going to talk about, what conflict you're going to identify. A, for the next 3 or 4 minutes, tell B your version of a housing-related situation. It could be one of the noise situations that we referred to. It could be the shared roommate situation. It could be the rent situation. It could be the new tenant moving in, whichever situation you're interested in. Your job is to share, and for B, your job at this point is to listen, and then when we tell you to give feedback, at that point you're going to share back what you heard in terms of feelings and facts. What information did you hear? But give back to them. And you can start that by saying, what I heard you saying is. What I heard you saying is. Any questions? Okay. A, your turn to share.
Sorry, I just wanted to switch to the slide as a visual aid. So I switched the slide. I'm using the remote to do that now. Time after 5 minutes? 4 minutes? Okay. So I put the slide up that tells what the fuck this is.
One of the things, as I mentioned when I was introducing you, the staff that really connected.
Yeah.
Not that others didn't. They really connected and were able to verbalize and work through putting into practice for those folks that are more minute to minute,
Yeah.
day to day, which makes great sense.
Yeah.
It brought up a couple of things. One, how much more we need to give them tools,
Right.
coaching, and also and be clear. I need to check out and calibrate that the clinical team is not, missing some of the just straightforward aspects of it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you're looking at the behavior-focused training. This is a good bit at the time. And we're looking at it, and this is 7 minutes fast, by the way, so don't worry about it. usually the people who are on the front lines are the ones who are experiencing more of those behavior situations and left, to fend for themselves to figure it out. And when we do a training, the ideal pathway to do it, I guess, might be to get that feedback from those frontline people to learn what's going on, but then to have someone top down come up with what do we want all those frontline people to do, because and train to that norm. Because well, you said so we have 2 minutes left from when you said 4 minutes. Sorry, we were just following up on this training. And I had spoken to Megan about this beforehand. Usually what I do when I do those trainings is I say, give me the guidance that you have that exists, and we'll incorporate that in. But otherwise, what you end up training is, you leave everybody, to their own judgment because there's no guideline. And so, another way to do the training is also to work with leadership.
Okay, so B, how did it feel to be the listener?
It's hard, because you want to interject, especially when you can relate, say, now turn it into you and how you could relate to that, and that has happened to you as well.
Sometimes it's all about me, but they could care less. It's about them. So we have to be careful that we don't turn it to all about us. Did any of you start giving feedback yet? Okay. B, now give your feedback to A. What I heard you saying, and if you look on the screen, repeat back feelings, content, the kinds of words that you heard, but be careful. Sometimes there are words that are shared that you don't want to give back precisely. So think of different words to use. Paraphrase. Someone refers to someone as, the B word, you don't want to give that back, right? So think of another way of talking about someone who is not being kind or understanding or whatever it is that you might want to refer to the person as. Okay, you have about 2 minutes, B, to tell A what you heard them say.
You got your B word in. So we're just talking, I gave a training on challenging behaviors to some of the staff at the university. And so what happens when I give the challenging behavior training is a lot of times usually the people who respond most are the people who are on the front lines, but they're the ones with this power to make decisions about what should be done.
He's training and he's so one of the things we've been trying to get very clear guidelines in certain situations. We're really trying to focus on that listening, but just don't personalize.
Right. So you've actually, since the training, you've developed some new guidelines.
We've worked on that a lot.
Okay, in the interest of time. So, A, did you get a good reflection from B? The content, the feelings, perhaps even some of the words, so that you really felt like what you were expressing was being heard by the other side. And you just keep being mindful that you have to keep practicing how to do this, because it's so easy to turn it into me, myself, and I, right? Oh, I know exactly what you're going through. No, you don't. I understand. No, you don't. I mean, what we're doing is hearing others, but we don't necessarily understand exactly what someone's going through. Rarely will someone say, oh, yeah, I know you understand. No, you don't understand. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to swap now. B, you have about 3 minutes to tell A, your story about a housing-related situation. And A, you're the listener. or the waiter as, someone who's waiting.
One of the things that I know is more
Yeah.
is so challenging.
Right.
And we work with things, we work with a lot of folks that are prior histories of volatile behavior, including behavior. And I do one thing. We can do a lot of things. But one thing is like arm, if you will, power. For people, having another one before. And the root of that, is managing it, really managing yourself.
Right.
And being in that hurricane.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I try to do with that workshop in the first day is to distinguish between which is maybe a source of motivation and actually what the behavior is.
Yes.
So when you say, oh, well, what is that? I'm dealing with an angry tenant. Angry tenant could be perceived as the behavior. Or they could be breaking a table.
Okay, A, your turn. What I heard you saying is or was, or you could say something like, it sounds like you're having a frustrating time with whatever. Give back your feedback so that they know that they have been heard. You have about 2 minutes for that.
So, it's a very complimentary thing. What happens is people sometimes communicate things like anger, which is in general, and they don't have specific where the boundaries are of behavior. And ultimately, at some point, the one clear boundary that seemed to come through on behavior typically was if there's any even tiny health concern, get the person checked out. That came out.
Listen up.
Yeah, but that's not always what you do. You guys are like, we really believe in checking on the health insurance. And so that was the one real right. No, but that was the one real clear. Everybody knew, that's what you do. And that people were everyone as soon as we're in health insurance, every single person, all the checking, we're gonna get fully engaged. We're gonna call someone's evaluating the person. We don't want to risk missing a problem. And I think there's opportunities for there to be other red lines. Yeah, did you want to do a share out about it? It's up to you. We have 25 minutes left, so whatever you'd like to do. Yeah, well, I can truncate it also. So, I'm happy to. Did you want to share out? Yeah, do a quick one and then I'll go.
Okay, so now everyone's had an opportunity to be a speaker and a listener. Who found being the speaker the easier role? Who found the listener being the easier role? Great. The listener and the waiter. So what tidbits could you share with others that was sort of a learning moment for you? A quick learning moment.
Well, maybe sometimes you jump to conclusions about what maybe they're going through, or if you've gone through it yourself, you would think, well, this is how you're also feeling, even if they didn't say that part.
Right. So you're sort of jumping ahead, and we have to be very careful because related to, earlier I referred to microaggressions. You've probably also heard a lot of talk about implicit biases. And we all walk around with unconscious biases about others, about situations, and they surface only at certain times. And we have to be very careful that they don't surface at a moment when, like, this critical time when you're trying to be an active listener, you already know what someone's going through because you have these biases because of our experience, because of who we are, because of our education, because of our lack of knowledge, whatever it is that influences the way in which we interact with others. What other tidbit did one more share? We have a big room here. Yeah.
It's hard to be fair, because if there are people, clients, you like, and maybe it speaks to the biases that you were questioning. It's a real challenge to be very balanced and fair.
Yep. And a lot of that is because of our implicit biases. Sometimes we're not, most of the time, we're not even aware that these are our preferences, our biases. It's something that we may have always done, something that we were exposed to, something that we don't like, whatever it is, that make it very hard for us to be fair to everyone. It's something we have to really work on. There's no magical formula or easy solution to this. The more we keep reminding ourselves, the easier it gets. I saw one more hand.
I was just going to say that even though we don't work in the same field, we have one goal: to serve very challenging residents and clients at the end of the day.
So sometimes these reflective moments are in fact learning moments that in fact we do share a lot with each other. Great. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Dan so that we can do another exercise. Thank you.
So, one thing I want to stress before we go into the remainder of the exercises is just because we're going to gloss past reflective listening and introduce it pretty quickly doesn't mean it's not very, very important. So I hope that you'll know that we're going to jump now into what you might do to try to solve a situation. But really, the fundamental cornerstone of conflict resolution is you don't want to be solving the situation. You want to remind yourself how important it is to listen to someone, even if they're saying something you disagree with, even if they're saying something that you don't think is important, to make that time for reflective listening. And one of the things we're going to do is we have the tools that we're going to share with you afterwards, and that includes some tools for reflective listening. Does anyone have the pad? Where's the pad? All right, so it's making its way around. All right, so that's the pad if you want to put your email address for the tools. I've got a little bit of a attachment to the pad. So another thing, just as an advice for you to practice reflective listening, remember reflective listening, you don't say anything yourself, you just repeat back what you heard from the person. I like to practice in taxis. So when I'm with a taxi driver and they say something, I like to just go back and forth and just keep having that taxi driver talk, and that's a good opportunity for me to practice my reflective listening skills if you feel safe talking to that driver. So now I read the news over the day and I'm warning my sisters not to get into Ubers, so don't do it necessarily if you don't feel safe with whoever's driving you. But it takes a long time. It sounds simple, but I still am practicing how to do this. It's a very important conflict resolution skill. So the next exercise we're going to go into is just about getting to the underlying needs when there's a conflict. And what that means is people often come in and they say what they want, but we don't want to talk about the specific things that people want. We want to understand what it is they actually need or care about so we can work out a better solution. And that's called getting past the person's positions and getting to their underlying needs. So a position is a specific expressed choice related to a decision that someone has to make. That's my definition. Maybe if you come in a year from now, it'll be different because it is a little convoluted. But a specific expressed choice related to a decision you have to make. So what is an example of a position? Well, I want quiet hours after 9 p.m. That's a position. That's specific. Be quiet after 9 o'clock. No guests unless we both agree that they can come in here. That's a specific position. No guests unless we both agree. I want each of us to clean our dishes right after use. Specific. That's a specific position. I don't want you to talk to me about household chores unless it's in the evening. That's a specific thing that I want about something a decision that we're making. Most of these are roommate situations. So what's the need, or some people will say the interest? What's the underlying motivation or the reason that led to that position? That's what we want to talk about. We don't want to talk about should quiet hours be at 9 p.m. We want to talk about what's the reason this person wants quiet hours at 9 p.m. So we have that position. I want quiet hours after 9 p.m. Maybe their need is I need my sleep. And you're going to do an exercise to think about what might be some of the other needs, because it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of reasons someone might want quiet hours after 9 o'clock. and you don't know what this person cares about. You might assume it's because they want to sleep. Maybe they don't care at all about sleep. Maybe they care about something else. The position, no guests unless we both agree. Well, the need, I need to feel comfortable in my home. Maybe that's the need. Maybe I hate your guests. So maybe that's the need. I need to stay away from that person. You don't know what the need is. Maybe the need is I need to feel respected. I need to feel, maybe I don't like surprises. There's going to be a lot of different needs. And just saying no guests unless we both agree, we don't really know. And it could be more than one, right? I want us to clean our dishes right after use. So what might be the need for that? I need to feel the apartment is orderly and clean. So maybe that's why. But maybe it's something else too. I don't want you to talk to me about the household chores unless it's in the evening. I need to reduce my stress in the mornings. It could be that. It could be, but again, it could be lots of things. Any guess how we're going to get from positions to needs? It's a simple thing for us to do. What are we going to do? Listen. And this is a chance where we get to speak. What do we ask? Why? That's the simplest thing a conflict resolver does. Why? Why do you want this? What does that do for you? What does that matter for you? That is so lesson 1 you already got, which was to do the reflective listening to whoever you're talking to, and you do that for a long time. And then what's the first thing we do after we listen? We ask why. Open-ended question. So we wouldn't say, oh, do if someone says, going backwards here, I want quiet after 9 p.m. I'm not going to say, oh, do you want to go to bed early? I'm going to say, why do you want quiet hours after 9 p.m.? I'm not going to jump in with a closed-ended question. I'm going to ask the open-ended question. And because we have that I need my sleep, but it could be something else. And you don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. You want to let them have a chance to have their voice heard and say what their needs are. And so that's the goal here. It's very simple. So you learn reflective listening. Now we're going to separate those positions from the needs and start talking more about what people need and what people are interested in instead of what they're asking for. So there's this iceberg picture up here. It's a very common representation of positions and needs. I'm going to try to use it's not working. I don't know what I'm doing with this. So the positions are the things that you see on the surface. You think you know the story, but you don't know the whole story. The needs and the interests are what's underneath of that iceberg. And that's the substance of really what your conversation should always be about, trying to meet someone where their needs are. And I'll give you a secret also that's not supposed to be part of this exercise, which is if you listen to someone and just validate them about their needs, even if you don't end up giving them what they want, they might feel good. At least somebody heard them and treated them with respect. That you listened and understood what they cared about. Even if at the end of the day you say, I can't help you as part of the agency here. I only have limited authority. I can't do anything. But I hear that it's important to you to get your sleep, or I hear it's important to you to feel respected. And that I'm validating that and listening to that. And you've gotten to a point where you're not just saying, I hear you want quiet hours after 9 p.m., but you get to that underlying need. So that's one of the most important things to listen to also. So we have a role play example here. In the interest of time, we don't really have a full role play for any of you to take on the roles of the characters. So what I want you to do is get yourself into groups of 2 or 3, whatever's easiest. And what you're going to do is brainstorm, just so you can know, what are possible needs in this situation. So the situation, Ralph is upset because John makes a lot of noise at night, especially when he's talking on the phone. Ralph is also upset that Anna from social services has not fixed the problem. So that's the situation. Does it sound like a common one? Yeah. All right. So that's the situation. And what I want you to do is, answer the question, what are Ralph's positions and needs? So Ralph is the one who's upset that John's making noise at night. What we're going to do is I want you to discuss pretty quickly, just brainstorm ideas. We don't know. We're not meeting with these people. We're not asking them questions. Normally, what you're going to always do is go in and just ask them what question? Why? Why do you care? Why is this important to you? But right now, I just want to have you guys leave here at least with this idea that this story, which you all hear, which sounds so simple, maybe there's a lot of complicated things behind it about different needs people might have. So go through and do Ralph's positions and needs. If you have a pad, you can draw it on a piece of paper and go through what Ralph's positions and needs are. And in the interest of time, let's just do this for 3 minutes. And if you have, we're going to just do two people's needs, Ralph's needs, and then also John's needs. So John is the one who's talking on the phone late at night. So let's imagine what Ralph's needs are, who's complaining that John is making noise, and what John's needs are. He's the one who's talking on the phone late at night. And then we'll just do a quick discussion because I want to show you the last exercise, at least introduce it so you can learn a bit about making effective agreements. So take a couple of minutes, pair off with people around you, and if it was really, if you prefer to be alone, you can also do this by yourself. So we're doing Ralph and John. What are Ralph's needs? What might Ralph's positions and needs be, and what might John's? Rectify the mistake from the ABA conference. Copy emails. Yeah, I usually work really hard on these. I'll get them. Unless, did you want to take it?
No, I just want to see if there's anyone we can identify now and say, hey, what's your...
Okay, so if you haven't moved on to guessing some needs for John, you could do that now. John is the one who's on the phone. I just want to make sure we save time for the, because we're getting to the end of the workshop. I want to make sure we save time for the next exercise too. So Ralph is the one who's upset because of the noise, and you guys should have come up with some needs for Ralph. Now come up with some needs for John, who's making the noise, and we'll just discuss that and then move on to the next exercise. So take like a couple of minutes. Are you copying down the ones you think you can't read?
No, the listserv. What do you think that is? Alvin?
AWINARSKY. Okay, so I apologize for the abbreviated exercise, but does anyone want to talk about what Ralph wanted, his position, and what his needs were behind it, or what his needs might have been, because we're just guessing. So what's Ralph's position? Don't use the phone at night. Okay, what might be the needs?
Quiet time, sleep time, sleep time.
So we got sleep. Okay, I'm going to just give you some ideas of what the needs might be. So one might be sleep. One might be that Ralph doesn't feel like there's anyone Ralph can call.
Yeah.
And Ralph doesn't like hearing someone on the phone because Ralph is someone who is lonely. And so doesn't want to be reminded that people are having social entanglements. One might be Ralph is hearing some things on that phone call that Ralph doesn't want to be hearing. Maybe it's something illegal. Maybe it's something sensual. Whatever it is. One might be that Ralph has heard of other people who are roommates who are more considerate and ask before they speak on the phone, and doesn't like that their roommate is not as respectful, and Ralph has a need to feel respected. One might be that there's certain policies in the building that after a certain time, or what you're supposed to do technically with your roommate about how to handle noise in the room, and maybe Ralph doesn't care about the noise, but cares that the policy is not being followed. So these are some different ways that we might think of all different kinds of possible needs that someone might have, and we want to find out what they are, so we know what to work on. Usually, when we're doing a conflict resolution thing, it might be. Well, let me jump to John. What might John need when John has the phone call?
We came up with a designated area to have phone conversations.
Okay, so that's a solution to the problem, and that's it makes sense. You guys are all problem solvers, but when we're resolving the conflicts, what we try to do is just understand and hear from people and get ideas of what might be their feelings. So that's okay. You jumped ahead to what the agreement might be. That's the next exercise.
So he needs to, we also said that he needs to have discussion with either,
Right.
supporting family or friends.
Right. Maybe Ralph is speaking to family. Maybe Ralph needs the companion. Or John needs the companionship. Maybe both of them have needs around feeling, feeling isolated and needing to talk. And maybe that's what you end up talking about is how you don't know until you get in there. But what ends up happening is people come in and they talk to you, and you do the listening. For a long time, all you do is do the reflective listening and nothing else. Then you start asking that one question: why? Why you mentioned this before. Why does this matter to you? Why do you want this? And you get those needs out, and then the conversation ends up being, well, it sounds like everybody here cares about feeling respected. John wants to feel respected that he's able to make phone calls. Ralph wants to feel respected that he is. So let's have a conversation about brainstorming ways we can talk about how each of you will respect each other. And now you have a balanced agenda for your conversation, and we're talking about those needs. Or both of you care about how you're going to communicate or when to talk in the apartment, and you broaden it by getting to those needs, and then let that be the topic for your conversation. So again, we're not giving you a full conflict resolution training here, so I'm just trying to show you some key points of listen, ask why, and get the conversation focused on the needs. And so the last exercise, which we're just going to have to do as a group because we only have a few minutes, is how do you reality check agreements? And what does that mean? Well, that means when you are working on a conflict and you're going to come up with a solution to that conflict, you want to make sure it's going to work. You want to make sure that solution is something that's not going to fall apart the second the two people walk out the door. So there's 5 key features to remember of a good agreement. And these are all in the handout that I'll email you, and many of the other resources we're going to send. The agreement should be specific. So it's not we're just going to make sure someone cleans up in the kitchen, but it's going to say when we clean up in the kitchen, who cleans up, exactly what they're doing. It's got to be realistic. So it's got to be something that both people can do. So when you're working on an agreement, you ask, does this sound like something that's going to work? Does it sound like something that you're going to be comfortable doing for a long time? It's going to be, let me actually give you a quick example, because my favorite example for realistic is 2 people say, we'll just never yell at each other ever again, and we'll never curse at each other ever again. And you say, okay, but earlier you mentioned that you felt like you lost control. Are you sure that that's something that you'll really be able to do? And then the agreement becomes, we'll apologize to each other as soon as we can, whenever we yell. And honestly, that's a much better agreement, because the people are probably going to yell at each other. They instead of walking away, eventually when they cool down, they'll come and apologize. And that works. And guess what? When people do have an agreement like that, maybe they're going to yell at each other a little less now, because they're going to start building those norms, like Maria was saying about the better good mornings, where you start getting into a better rhythm. You want the agreement to be balanced, so it doesn't point fingers at one person or another. You want it to be sustainable, so it works for a long time. And it's very important that you always come up with a plan to update the agreement, because otherwise the people are going to be litigating this. They're going to be yelling at each other. You agreed to this, and we didn't. And you want to, just like the Constitution has a plan for amendments, we want to have a plan to amend this agreement. So if this isn't working, what are we going to do? How are we going to change it? So that way nobody comes to you and says, we have this agreement and they're not following the agreement, and that agreement is like the Bible, and there's nothing that we can do about it. So those are the key features of good agreements. The exercise we were going to do, but we don't have time, is 2 neighbors have been in conflict with each other because one of them feels the other is noisy. They call each other names, bang on the walls, and regularly get into arguments. And after meeting with you, they've agreed to be nice to each other, which is not a good agreement from a conflict resolution perspective. Now, is it a common agreement? Is this a common thing that two people say we're going to be nice to each other? Yes. So the goal of the exercise, which you'll have to do in your head on your own, and if you do it and you want to email me, I'm happy to answer you about it, is what questions can we ask to make this a better agreement? What questions can we ask to make it specific, balanced, realistic, sustainable, and updatable? So that was the last exercise. I'm sorry we did not get to it, but I appreciate all of your attention and all of your email addresses, which I have up here at the pod now, so thank you. We'll definitely write to you with more resources, and if you want to come up here with any quick questions at the end, we're happy to chat with anyone. And sorry again, we don't have more time for Q&A. And here's the resource list in case anyone needs it. So thank you.
And thank you, Maria.
So you're able to take questions if they come up?
For a few minutes.
Sure. Got it.
I figured that I wasn't
Good to see you,
imposing
sir.
on you. Yeah, it's good
Pleasure.
to see you too.
Yeah.
Do you record or something? Maybe I'd love to hear more about your experience because I do these trainings and then I don't hear from people.
I got
I have your email also, so I probably
Got mine, but I don't know if I have any here. You do know my email.
Yeah, I'll just email you then. It's easier. I don't want to take your only card.
No, I got a couple. There you go.
All right, great. Thank you
Super.
very much.
Nice to meet you. Appreciate it. Enjoy.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi.